My goodness. I'm rarely speechless. Dr. McClain would know that. But this has just been awesome in terms of the music. And let's give a vocalist and a pianist a round of applause. Beautiful voice. And where I'm from, we call that singing. But not necessarily singing. But both of them seem the same, but they're not. So I just want to compliment you for your God-given talent. And I tell you, on a beautiful day like today, it goes with you. You know, I also want to take the time to honor this wonderful church for providing an opportunity for me to share my thoughts. And in spite of the many challenges that we're facing as it relates to COVID-19, it is always important for us to keep the faith. And we've learned in one of our holy books that faith without works is dead. And so for us to be here today, it continues and creates opportunities for the work that is required for us to move forward towards a society that is more consistent with our values than not. I also always want to acknowledge my elder and just key part of the Partnership of Southern Equities Movement, Dr. McClain, who is, of course, an institution in Savannah. If you do not know Dr. McClain, you should. I would encourage you to do so. And also for the staff of the Harambe House and officers of their board who have done so much work to prepare for my visit to Savannah. And I want you all to know that I appreciate everything that you have done to ensure that I got where I needed to get safely, and the people who needed to hear my message heard it. Now, whether they wanted to or not is another question. And I hope that in our time today, and I will try to be as brief as I can, we will have an opportunity to have what I call a real conversation. And hopefully this conversation will encourage you to potentially think differently about your responsibility, not only as a Christian, but as a disruptor of injustice. I come from a perspective in the Christian faith that believes that while Christ had a critical role in creating a new relationship with the Creator, he also came here to be a disruptor of the status quo. A status quo that did not look at all people who lived in that community as valuable. And he came in many ways to ensure that he created an opportunity with his followers to disrupt the injustices that he experienced in his day-to-day walk. And it is that connection, in my opinion, to Christ as a disruptor, Christ as an advocate, that, in my opinion, provides, it may not necessarily be the easiest road to being Christ-like, but it is a necessary road, especially during critical times like these. We cannot afford, in a time where somewhere in Savannah, a mother is choosing between paying their light bills or buying groceries to sit on the sidelines. We cannot afford, as people who have embraced any faith, and for us it's the Christian faith, to be comfortable with the various actions that are being done at this moment to take away democracy. For many people who have sacrificed for over 400 years to make it real for all citizens and all people who live in this country. We cannot afford to be silent and sit on the sidelines when our planet continuously is polluted by a corporate establishment that is more focused on profit than planet and people. We must, as Christians, follow the legacy of the great leaders and harbingers of love that have come before us and be willing to stand up and speak out even when our voices are trembling. It is our responsibility to do that if we call ourselves people of faith. Now, if this is just a performance and we're all just trying to find something to do on Sunday morning, and we like the prose of our holy books and like to talk more than act, then this conversation that I will share with you today, and hopefully you will be able to receive it, is not for you. This conversation is for the individual who understands that at the end of the day, living with intention, in particular during these times of uncertainty, means also living for justice. Living with intention in these times means that you must also live for justice. So what does that mean? What does that mean for an individual who has chosen to take a spiritual path to live for justice? What does it mean, ironically, Doc, that I began here speaking to community stakeholders about the value of their voice and leadership in community, and now I'm ending my time at a house of worship talking about justice? What does that mean to live with intention and at the same time live for justice? Well, the first thing as a person of faith, if you are committed to living with intention for justice, you must be willing to resist the systems and the injustices that have been created to, in some cases, make it easier for you to be prosperous at the expense of others. You must resist the privilege of structural racism and white supremacy. And I am not even specifically talking about the white community, because there are some individuals in this city who are African American that have also benefited from structural racism and white supremacy. So you must first acknowledge that there has been a system that was created many, many years ago to ensure that certain segments of our population have a chance to benefit from the pain and suffering of others. You cannot turn away from the history of our economy, that in particular in the South was built on the backs of slaves. You cannot drive past a street where communities of color live, and in particular Savannah, black communities, that don't have a grocery store, where it's easier to buy a honey bun than a head of lettuce, that have substandard housing and a lack of economic opportunity, and not understand the role of the federal government at banks in realizing redlining in communities and disinvestment in ways that stripped wealth and hope outside of the communities that needed it the most, that steered away individual and family wealth to ensure that communities of color remain poor and disenfranchised. You cannot turn away from the fact that many of your brothers and sisters of color live in places that have polluted facilities next to them, where people are dying systematically from cancer, asthma, and other key things, not because they chose to live in these communities, but because the hopelessness and the pollution chose to live next to them.
That's right.
You cannot be silent, even on a more micro level. When you sit at a dinner table with friends who have some idea about how they're more deserving for God's blessings than someone who may live on the shady side of town, they should just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Well, first and foremost, you need bootstraps to pull. So how are you utilizing your voice, embracing the privilege that you have, understanding the history of oppression and white supremacy in America and the historical role of Christian revolutionaries in pushing against that? It's a day-to-day proposition. Some days you may win in the resistance. Someday you may lose, but every day and in every way, you must resist the system of oppression. Outside, in your broader community, and even more important, inside of your heart. You must resist. The second thing that you must do is focus on reform. You must not only resist, but you must organize with your brothers and sisters in ways that will push against and disrupt these systems of injustice. You must work collectively to ensure that the laws in your community are a reflection of the values that are in your heart and not in the hearts of people who do not want us to come together as a human family. You must work to reform. Sitting on the sidelines and expecting someone else to do it will not get us where we need to be. If not you, who? You must work. That is the only way change has truly happened. You know, I have the honor of having parents that were involved in the civil rights movement. And I also had the honor of being loved and mentored actually by two individuals who grew up in Savannah, who I invoked yesterday in my talk. Lester Hankerson, who was from Savannah, and Reverend Willie Bolden, who were both pool sharks and hoods before they met Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King changed their lives. It is their story. The story of our ability to not only reform through our actions, but also work to reform ourselves, that creates opportunities for the change that we need in our community. You must work with both common and uncommon allies in order to move this work forward. Yes, this individual may not necessarily know how to conjugate their verbs the way that you do. But that does not necessarily mean that their children don't deserve to have a full stomach when they go to bed at night. They may not be able to go to some of the dinner parties that you may have an opportunity to participate in. But that doesn't mean that they don't deserve a community that is healthy, wealthy, and safe. They should not have to wait to die in order to go to what we believe is heaven, in order to experience peace in their lives. Heaven should be here for them, the same way that heaven, for some of you, is here for you. So we must resist, together, collectively, moving an agenda forward for change. The third thing that we must do is reconcile. Reconciliation is an important aspect of the work. And on many occasions, it is one of the fundamental reasons why, in my opinion, we have not been able to move forward as a nation. Because we have not taken an opportunity to formally reconcile for the history that has brought us to this point. We want to talk about Thomas Jefferson as being one of the framers of the Constitution, but we don't want to talk about Sally Hemings and the children that came from that relationship. We want to talk about George Washington not telling a lie. But we don't want to talk about that the teeth that he had in his mouth were not wooden. But actually some of the teeth in his mouth came from slaves. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about the history of white supremacy and colonialism and its effect on our Native American brothers and sisters. This was their land. And now we look around and call ourselves Americans and say that we need that other people need to go back to their own country. When we were the ones that need to go back if we listen to the Native Americans. So again, there is a history that we must reconcile as a community. That there are segments of the community that must be courageous enough to stand up and acknowledge their role. And there may be some people who are listening that may say, well, I didn't own slaves. Well, I did not oppress communities of color or African Americans. And I say to you that if you're not working to disrupt the system that continues to work on your behalf, on autopilot, then you're not doing your part to create a truly just society. Saying that your hand is not on the steering wheel driving when you know that the system has been designed now to be on autopilot is not a way to justify your responsibility in terms of not being involved in change. So we must work hard to reconcile, to come together as a community, to first acknowledge what has happened in our nation, but then to create an opportunity for the people that have been wronged to say, I forgive you. That is one of the major problems. We have not created a formal space for us to reconcile in this nation for what has happened. And you have leaders in political positions of power that in the past have fought against formal apologies for things like slavery. Why? Because they want to maintain the wedge, the political wedge that we have in our communities between the white community and other communities of color, in particular the black community. We've got to fight it. We've got to build bridges. we're tearing down statues, we also need to begin to build bridges. And you are a bridge builder. The last two, and I'll mention these quickly, is after reconciliation, we must work to repair. We must work to repair the communities that have been traumatized and been disinvested in. And there are many ways that can do that. We can do that. We can do that through the investment of dollars from your own purse strings, investing in organizations like the Harambe House that are working every day to make Savannah more just and equal and equitable. You can work to ensure that certain segments of the community have an opportunity to go to college, or there are many, many ways that you can work to help to repair. Voting to ensure that the right people are in positions of influence that will use dollars in a way that are more balanced and equitable. There are many, many ways, but we must work to repair our disinvested communities. Saying I'm sorry means nothing if you're not really willing to work to make things better. We've got to work together to make things better, and it is going to take more than just holding hands and singing Kumbaya. It's going to take cold, hard cash. I leave it up to you all to decide what that looks like in Savannah. Of course, there's a lot of work around the reparations movement. If you haven't taken the time to learn about the reparations movement and what that really means, I would encourage you to do that. But it may even be something as important as a living wage in this community. Working to ensure that individuals have access to workforce development opportunities, academic opportunities, utilizing community land trusts as a way to ensure that people can stay in their homes for the rest of their lives. There are many, many ways that you can work to repair communities. And I think that you all are positioned to do that as people who are working every day and in every way to live with intention. And if we're able to do all these things, if we're able to resist oppression, to resist the history and the culture of structural racism and white supremacy, if we're willing to work towards reform in our policies and in the way that we choose to work together as a human family, if we begin the process of reconciling the unfortunate history of this nation and of this world with you in particular, our white brothers and sisters leading the way. If we're able to come together as a community by way of this reconciliation process and begin a serious conversation around how can we work to repair the broken hearts and broken communities that structural racism has created, then we will finally get to revolution. Because if anybody in this room believes that the current system that we live in is working for everybody, I have oceanfront, I'm from Atlanta, I have oceanfront property on Peachtree Street that I have for sale if you want to buy it. If you can honestly say that with the gap that continues to grow between the super rich and the super poor, I've got news for you. So we must begin to not just tinker around the edges of our society. That is not going to create the type of change. We need a radical shift in the way that we look at each other, in the way that we treat each other. Dr. King called it a radical values revolution, a revolution of values that will create an opportunity for us to finally create the type of world that Our sages of the past came down to help to play their part in helping to realize it is our role and responsibility now to continue that journey. So again, I invite you, I compel you, I challenge you to take on the mantle of living with intention for justice. If not you, as I said before, who? Superman is not coming. And for the newer generation that may be listening online, T'Challa is not coming. We are the heroes that we've been waiting for. And it's not because I told you so. But in books like this, it is telling you so. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity to share. It has indeed been an honor to have a chance to congregate with you this morning. And I look forward to seeing you all on the path towards justice. Thank you so much.